Rasti, qui a slama rasti i cvjetaj, zemljo ravnih ljudi. I neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napuči i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, до окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Страна моя родная, на моей полторе. Никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. We are slightly delayed tonight due to the fact that I made a terrible mistake in thinking that Emmanuel Macron might be saying something of value or interest. Actually, forget the value, of interest. And it turned out what we got was a long, pretentious, but ultimately empty interview where he waffled and wavered all over the place and ultimately said nothing new. Unless I missed it, because I was watching it on the feed from France 24 and relying on my high school level French to try and understand what he was saying, then grabbing the interpretations when they came in. And all that I could see that he actually said of any particular relevance was that the that France was under, well, all of European security was under threat from the evil one in Moscow, Putin himself, and also that there could be no limits placed on aid to Ukraine, that all limits had already been broken, and that we needed to stand with Ukraine. We ratified the Great Defense Pact we've signed with Ukraine, which is, by the way, the whole the whole history of that the Defense Pact thing is a farce, because it is the same kind of trickery that the British have engaged in with Ukraine, which is that they say that, well, Ukraine and Britain are committed to each other's mutual defense. If in the future Ukraine is attacked, we will assist you. And if you believe that, then, well, it'll be worth about the same as the insurances that Neville Chamberlain gave the Czechs. Because British imperialism will always sacrifice its smaller allies if it is deemed convenient to do so. Just like they sacrificed the Poles in 1939. Why? In the hope that the Nazis would roll straight into an invasion of the Soviet Union. The whole thing with regard to the defense pacts for Ukraine is a sick joke. It is to give political cover to Zelensky, to make it look as if he has won something, to make it look as if NATO is coming in, to make it look as if the armies of the immortal crusading West are marching over the hill, whereas in actual fact there aren't any armies. There is no immortality in the West. What there are, and what there is, are a bunch of foolish men, largely men, though in Macron's case you could potentially doubt that, bullshitting their way through interviews, pretending that they're going to do something, but in actual fact having the being completely unable to deliver anything, and being completely unable to actually aid Ukraine in the way that they say they want to, but of course they don't want to. And we will get to why Macron gave a gigantic piece, delivered a gigantic nothing in this speech, having bullshitted for a week or so now, saying, "Oh well, maybe we'll do something, maybe we won't." It's the same thing that happens every time the Poles start rattling the old Polish cavalry saber starts to get rattled in its sheath, and people think that Duda's going to jump on a horse and lead the Polish lancers into old Galicia. And surprise, surprise, it doesn't happen. What happens is that, as the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs commented earlier today, that they take a bunch of French, Polish, American, British or Canadian military personnel, they formally discharge them from their armies, and then they send them over there to fight and actually die in significant numbers in Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs are claiming that significant numbers now have actually perished in the Ukraine war. If you didn't see it, there was a tweet from the Foreign Affairs Ministry which had a interesting graph attached to it. I'm just going to drop that into the chat there. So yeah, number of foreign mercenaries arrived and eliminated in Ukraine. And I'll before we get to the greetings in the chat, I just want to share this with you. So the Russians are claiming that the top countries to have sent significant numbers of what they call mercenaries into Ukraine, and they'll be formally described as mercenaries, but most of these will have been serving soldiers in these armies until relatively recently, or long-time mercenaries who took a big payday to go there. So, according to this, there have been, since the beginning of the special military operation, 2,960 Poles who have been in Ukraine, of which 1,497 have been killed. Brits, 822 gone there, 360 dead. Romanians, 784 gone there, 349 dead. Croats, 335 gone to Ukraine, 152 dead. French, 356 gone to Ukraine, 147 dead. Latvia, 190 gone, 95 dead. So in terms of Brits, that's a pretty substantial number. 360 killed is pretty high, given the relatively small numbers of the British military and the relatively small numbers of the casualties they take these days, because they're just simply not deployed to active war zones in significant numbers anymore. But also, over 1,000, so 1,042 Georgians, 561 dead, 200 Syrians, 102 dead. They'll mostly, I would suspect, be from the jihadist international legions that were being bankrolled by Erdogan in Syria. Funnily enough, next up on the list is Turkey. 188 mercenaries allegedly gone to Ukraine. Russians claim 62 of them killed. Azerbaijan, 63 gone, 32 killed. Israel, 64 gone, 29 killed. So you're looking at roughly, very roughly in some cases, but almost 50% of those mercenaries who go to Ukraine, so you're looking at 50% of them killed. So 822 Brits, 360 dead, that's about like 40 odd percent. My very bad maths would do that rough translation. Other interesting thing, I know we've got some Irishmen on the chat tonight, so apparently there have been 158 Irishmen. I'm not sure if they're counting the north of Ireland as part of Ireland, but 158 Irish mercenaries gone to Ukraine, 67 dead. Again, I know the Track a Merc site does a job on looking for these guys, but interesting thing to find out would be how many of these characters were previously serving in Syria. Certainly the Syrians and the Turks will probably have been. Also, the number of Chechens who've popped up on the Ukrainian side were guys who were involved with various different Chechen jihadist groups like 20, 50, or 15 years ago. Then have been like an international legion of arseholes for imperialism ever since. Of course, the two other big numbers come from the Americas. The Russians claim 1,113 American personnel have been sent to Ukraine, of which 491 are dead. Again, that's around about the 40% mark. Canada, 1,005 gone, 422 dead. Colombia, 430 gone, 217 dead. Brazil, 268 gone, 136 dead. Bolivia, 502 gone, 44 dead. Argentina, 58 gone, 17 dead. Maybe Milei will improve on that. He'll send even more. Other significant figures: African nations, Nigeria, 97 sent, 47 dead. Australia, 60 sent, 25 dead. New Zealand, 7 sent, 6 dead. Indonesia, 10 sent, 4 dead. So that's an indication as to the who's gone there and who's been killed. So what we can expect from Macron is probably trying to find more volunteers, be it French Foreign Legion or anybody else who can be pressured or bribed into going to Ukraine. That's who's going to be sent. The idea that the French parachute regiment are going to be marching into Odessa anytime soon, I think is a bankrupt idea. There's a reason why there was a leak to the Marianne magazine earlier this week, probably from the French military, leaking all the information that they are saying that has gone to Macron. And that information is quite interesting because it contains a whole load of details which, if you've been following Russian sources, you'll have known for a while, which is that the Ukrainians are running out of men. They don't have enough men to carry out coherent assaults on the Russians. By comparison, The Russians have enough men to rotate their units on a regular basis so that forces do not get exhausted. They have more than enough equipment, they have more than enough ammunition, and they haven't even deployed the bulk of their trained men to the theatre of battle as yet, whereas the Ukrainians are facing imminent collapse. And that got leaked to the Marianne magazine precisely because the French military wanted to basically tell Macron, look, if you do this, this is suicidal. So that's why Macron went and gave that feeble and pathetic interview just now, where he bullshitted and said nothing, because he can't do anything. Now, a question was raised yesterday, which is a legitimate question, about the capabilities of Europe and whether they would go for a war with Russia just to sort of roll the dice and see what happens. And we'll come to that later on. But first of all, we should really greet those who are in the chat so far. So we have Cobra Commander with us. We have Dr. Ahmed with us. Hello to you both. Good afternoon to Jenny. And hello to Ben from Pech in Hungary. I probably mispronounced that. Ian Foster, good evening to you, comrade. Tim Gray, good evening to you. Davey from Bangor, Gwynedd, good to have you with us. Carmo, good evening. Ben says, Macron has really lost it after the Marianne leaks. He now says Russian victory is existential threat to Europe and France. People against French troops or against our sovereignty and favour defeat. Well, I saw that one. I saw that bit pop up on a Telegram channel with actual translation underneath it. I'll come to his comments about that later, because again, remember, just as when Sunak went on that extraordinary, I would call it a rant, but that would be to give him credit for having actually projected any passion into it, a sort of boring drone of sort of threats and incoherent ramblings on the steps of Downing Street. When they make these statements, they claim to speak for the nation, where in actual fact what they're doing is speaking for their class, or the class they represent, which is the ruling class. So we'll come to what that actually meant later on. Good afternoon to Jeremy, who says, good afternoon, comrades from Brooklyn, USA, home to Haitians and Zionists alike, and many others, of course. Good to have you with us. Kent, hello to you. Jawad says, salam, comrades. Banana Bender says, good morning. And good morning to you at the other end of the world. Glad you're enjoying the Red Blacksmith song, Ben. Thomas, who says, good day, comrades from all around the world. Peter, who joins us from Perfidious Albion. Clinton says, the music is great, but it's not going to catch on with the kids. Well, depends on the kid, really. I mean, when I was a child, when I was a teenager, I wouldn't have liked this. But then again, when I was a teenager, I had shit taste. I mean, seriously, I listened to Oasis and thought it was good. You're not encouraged to have, here's an interesting point, you're not encouraged to actually develop a really cultured tastes when you're raised in the working class. Now my family tried probably harder than most to get me into more cultured things, and the long-lasting influence of that probably sort of rescued my mind from the cultural sewer that British bourgeois culture actually is. But when you're working class, you're basically fed a diet of like terrible music, terrible TV programs, god-awful movies, shite literature, and you've got a shite education system which never encourages you to actually stretch or use your intellect. So it's no wonder that when we all grow up completely uncultured, because we're encouraged to. We're never encouraged to actually develop our cultural sensibilities or our intelligence beyond the bare minimum that's required by employers. And that's more true now than ever. It's worse now for the current generation than it was when I was at school 25 years ago. Gonzalo, good evening. Paul, who says, good evening, comrades. Anyone at the Revolution Report stream a while ago? No, I wasn't. I'm sure somebody who is here will have been at that, though. Rob, good evening to you and Beans over there on the wrong side of the Pennines. Good evening to Otis, who joins us. Ben says, Macron, EU's credibility will be zero if Russia wins the war. Well, Ben's being generous there. He says 10 years too late. I'd say it's 30 years too late. And if Macron thinks he's Bonaparte, then, well, he's been spending too much time watching the Ridley Scott movie. Um, Tonight. Um, Lertis, good evening to you, who says, good luck with unraveling Macron, a fascinating experiment with giving full powers to a 5-year-old. He's a man who's never grown up, and he's a man who's never had to grow up because he's a pure product of the French bourgeoisie, and always has been. He's never faced a significant challenge in his life, and probably never will. And so he tries on these various different outfits of great statesman, great war leader, Charles de Gaulle, The Return, Napoleon Part 4, and none of them fit because he is a product of a decadent and degenerating class, just the same as Rishi Sunak is, just that he has more French characteristics, Macron. And so he is convinced that he is a genius. He is convinced that he is born to rule. He is convinced that he alone can save France from destruction, whereas in actual fact he's a representative of the class that is dooming France to destruction, just as Rishi Sunak is a product of the class that is dooming Britain to destruction. These fools think that they are something special, and it all comes from a fatal delusion. The fatal delusion being that they are the representatives of the winners of the Cold War. They are not. They never were. They did not win the Cold War. The other side surrendered. The other side took a dive. The leaders of the other side did. And they blew up their system in the hope of being rewarded. Then, after years of chaos and being continually being kicked in the nuts by the imperialist powers, the certain elements in the ruling circles in Russia finally realized that they were not going to be allowed to rest until their country had been completely destroyed, which was too much even for some elements in the Russian bourgeois, though the minority, it must be said. The bulk of the Russian bourgeois wouldn't care if their entire nation burnt down, just as ours wouldn't. Now, the point about this is that they spent the Europeans and the Americans spent 30 years telling themselves that they were the unmatched geniuses who had won the Cold War. In actual fact, what they didn't understand was that the treacherous revisionists and the liquidationists in the Soviet Union, they are the ones that gave them the victory, which is why they expected to be rewarded. They expected to be allowed to sit at the table with the imperialists and share the world amongst them. And they were never allowed to. And they finally worked that out. Putin, I think, had worked it out by 2003 to 4, but because of the way his system works, they essentially spent another 20 years almost, or 18 years, trying to bargain with something that can't be bargained with. Xi Jinping, as you say, Cobra Commander, it wasn't Macron he was bollocking. It was Trudeau, because Trudeau, of course, he's very similar to Macron in that he's this puffed up pipsqueak who thinks he's incredibly clever when he's not. And Trudeau did a very similar thing to what Macron did, but Trudeau did it to Xi Jinping and Macron did it to Putin. Trudeau leaked the details of a confidential discussion with the Chinese leadership to the Canadian press because he thought he could gain some sort of cheap political advantage out of it. And Macron allowed French journalists to record his conversation with Putin and of course didn't tell Putin. So that proves that, and of course Macron did that as a cheap popularity stunt and to prove that he was this sort of great leader, whereas in actual fact all it did was prove that he was a fool. Basically, like, he was prepared to burn any bridge that he might have had with the Russian leadership. In return for what? In return for some good newspaper headlines the next day, and for him looking like some sort of genius on the news. And of course, Xi Jinping bollocked Trudeau when Trudeau did the same or a similar thing. And Trudeau just stood there looking like a shocked little boy. Because again, like, these are men who've never experienced any difficulties in their lives at all. Trudeau's just like floated around as the favoured son of a former one of Canada's most prominent statesman in the post-war era, another defender of Nazism, of course. And he's floated around his whole life with no challenges, floated into office, basically based on the fact that he possessed his father's surname, and has sort of drifted around in office, just taking the recommendations of his advisors, not really making any decisions himself, just looking to present himself in the best possible light on television, and just doing what the ruling class wanted him to do, acting as their spokesman. And so when he finally got faced with somebody who was prepared to say, no, you're an idiot, and I'm going to tell you you're an idiot in your face, he looked like someone had just slapped him. Whereas, of course, he'd been a lot more capable a man had he been punched in the face repeatedly at the age of 14 and bullied remorselessly all the way through school. That would have done him many more favors than the life he's ultimately led. Whether he's Fidel's son or not is another question. Or whether Maduro is actually the bastard son of Joseph Stalin or a bastard grandchild. Who knows? Ethel Betts comes on and asks, what is my opinion on the Shining Path movement in Peru? I don't know, to be honest. I don't know enough about them. I have seen various different pieces of information about them, but I'm not going to comment before I have read the relevant books. Ultimately, it's not a movement that succeeded, but we'll see. We'll see. I'll have to do some research on it before I can give you an answer on that. I'll add it to the list of questions I have to return to. Tim Gray says, what is the betting some establishment clown in Britain will be the next to talk about fighting Russia? It's already happened. Some clown in the House of Lords got up and started raving about the need to bomb Russia like NATO bombed Yugoslavia in 1999. Of course, what the relevant clown or irrelevant clown actually failed to take into account was the fact that Yugoslavia, as it was militarily diminished, didn't have much of an air force, and did have some air defense. They did shoot down the stealth bomber, famously, but was also not really capable of matching the NATO air power in terms of their own air force, or their own matching them by their own air defense. But the Russians, of course, do have an air defense and do have a very powerful air force, which even British military officials have admitted would destroy the British Royal Air Force within a week. And so this Lord, if you're not familiar with what the House of Lords is, it's essentially the former primary chamber of the British Parliament back in the days of feudalism. Now it's gone away from being somewhere where the hereditary aristocracy hang out to being somewhere where essentially it's an appointed Senate now. It's used as a patronage and reward system by the British bourgeois political parties. So this lord by the name of Kuldip Sahota, he came out and said, well, we should bomb Russia like we did Yugoslavia. Well, okay, try that and see what happens. Because unlike in Yugoslavia, where the air defense was damaged and was not what it could have been, certainly not what it was when the Yugoslav People's Army was at its peak. In Russia, you have a comprehensive integrated air defense system. You have an air force. And if you try and fly your wonderful NATO air force over Russia and try and bomb places, well, they're going to shoot it all down. And then they're going to repay you in the same coin, which is that they're going to level various different capitals of Europe. Is Lord Sahota ready for that? Will he be manning an anti-aircraft gun? I doubt it. I mean, these fucking morons. First of all, it's a guy in the House of Lords. I mean, how connected with reality can he be? These are generally older, largely drunk individuals who hang around cashing their expenses checks. And it's essentially, it's a reward system these days for people who've done services for the bourgeoisie. That's why there's so many trade union leaders there, or retired trade union leaders, or do I mean retarded trade union leaders? No, they are ones who at least understood that they were servants of the bourgeois. So, and again, a member of the House of Lords rants and raves about it. Tobias Aylward, I mean, you can expect him to have another rant and rave about this, but why is it that fundamentally this isn't something that is possible? I'll come to that in just a moment. But before we go further, I'll just say hello to Movie Maker Joe, who's joined us, and Bart, who's joined us, Potted Rodent, who's joined us, and Grassy Knoll, who's with us as well. So why is it that old Emmanuel and the cannibals was unable to deliver upon his threats thus far? Well, the truth is, it's not just that the French army's diminished, which it is. It's diminished from its high point in the post-World War II era. It's also about the capacity of French industry and the capacity also of French society to sustain a war. Now, a comrade raised a very pertinent question in the chat yesterday, in the Telegram chat, where the question was asked, well, why wouldn't the European bourgeoisie, particularly the French bourgeoisie, and the Germans, who are facing a big internal crisis in terms of the degenerating economic situation, who, if they ever hope to revive their economic fortunes, will be forced to carry out a major assault on the working class. Well, what better way to do that than getting themselves in a war with the Russians and immediately rolling over to a full-blown either like extremely reactionary Bonapartist system or a system based on a system that is very close to fascism. And why not just do that, speed up the process, and then you can carry out the assault on the working class and smash working class resistance, drastically lower living standards, and engage in remilitarization. Why wouldn't they go for that? And it's a legitimate question to ask. So I hope to address that a little. First of all, the move to fascism, when it came in the 1920s and 30s, came under extreme pressure in terms of the bourgeoisie being under extreme pressure. Their legitimacy in Germany had been almost destroyed by World War One, by both losing the war and then having a huge working class uprising happen to end the war for good and chase out the Kaiser. And the Weimar Republic was basically something that they ended up with, but that nobody ever really wanted. The workers who rose up in 1918 wanted socialism, but they were still mistakenly following the Social Democrats to get it. And the reactionaries certainly didn't want it, though they realized they had to swallow this sort of bourgeois democratic republic for a while. But they were itching to get back to a sort of a form of authoritarianism that would be more profitable. In Italy, the Italian state had always been very weak ever since unification. It was subject to gigantic class struggles after World War One. Again, the proletariat moved in a revolutionary direction, but they were unable to complete the revolutionary process because, again, the influence of the Italian Social Democrats was too great. So the move to fascism then occurs after a long period of class war when the working class, due to the lingering, or should I say still powerful influence of the Social Democrats, is unable to overcome that, and the communists are unable to overcome it. Therefore, the revolutions fail. The working class becomes more divided and demoralized. There is also a ruined petty bourgeoisie. So the turn to fascism is an extreme move from the bourgeois faced with a unique series of crises. And the biggest of those is the risk that they might lose control of the country altogether. They might face a Russian-style revolution, or at least they feared they would. And so they turned to, another short man with inadequacy issues, Mussolini, and the failed Austrian watercolor artist. And they've turned to them to lead ruthless military-style dictatorships, but with the important addition of bringing back in the consent of the petty bourgeois for to restore their consent to the rule of the state by militarizing them, turning them into a paramilitary force, and then using them as a force to crush working class resistance. By doing that, and of course, by improving the economic situation, by drastically increasing the rate of exploitation of the working class, you also saw a temporary economic revival which benefited to a certain extent the petty bourgeoisie in Italy and in Germany. Now, the key factor here is that the bourgeoisie turns to fascism because they could no longer govern in the old ways. That's the point. Italy could not be governed in the old way by 1923. Germany could not be governed in the old way by, well, 1929 to 30 in actual fact, under the influence of the catastrophic war debts combined with the newer debts they'd taken on to US imperialism, combined with the catastrophe of the recession that began the Great Depression in 1929. All of those factors combined together to make the bourgeoisie believe that the state had become ungovernable in its current form and needed to be revived by instituting fascism. So the point is that they turned to that in the view of the bourgeoisie, that was their last throw of the dice to prevent a revolution. Now, bringing our situation up to date, what is the tests we can use to see whether fascism is on the horizon here? Now, is it true that the capitalist economies of Western Europe, Britain, and to a large extent the United States are in crisis? This is certainly true. They've been stagnating for 16 years now. Since the crisis of 2008 passed, they were able to, via enormous state intervention in the economy in favor of the bourgeois, refloat things after 2010 to 11. But of course, it was a revival that didn't really benefit even large areas of the petty bourgeoisie. So it's been economic stagnation now for 16 years in Western Europe and the United States. Very, very low rates of growth, if any growth at all. Arguably, in the British case, a lot of the so-called growth is basically fictional. So they certainly are in a position where they need to carry out assaults on the working class, and they have been not constrained from doing so, but they've been stopped to a degree from doing so by the temporarily, that is, by the multiple crises that have emerged since 2015. They haven't been able to go as far as they want to go, partially because of the crisis that have hit them, such as Brexit, the need they had to do in Corbyn, who obligingly committed political suicide for them. The COVID crisis was a crisis, but it was also an opportunity because the American and the British state were able to funnel gigantic amounts of financial support to the biggest corporations during the lockdown period, which actually helped to cover up what was a brewing recession in late 2019 anyway. So the crisis that it does exist today then is severe, but is it the case that the state has become ungovernable and that the ruling class has no options? Well, we're getting to that point. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. And here I will answer Tim's point about the repression under the Labour Party. Now, at the moment in Britain, the ruling class still has options. They are turning to one of these options in the form of Keir Starmer. And this is the reason why you see so much what's called push polling with regard to Starmer, is that they have designed a lot of these opinion polls that give the Labour Party like a gigantic 30-point lead in order to make people convinced that the Labour Party is inevitable, that they are going to win by a country mile. They're trying to create inside people's heads the idea that there is absolutely no possibility of anybody else winning, that Labour's going to dominate, and it's trying to create the sense of strength for Keir Starmer because he doesn't present a particularly strong figure. There's no doubt that the Tories are ruinously unpopular, but there's also no doubt that Starmer is not popular either, not to the degree that the opinion polls show. This is a situation where the population is being manipulated in order to try and push it towards viewing Starmer as their only option. So that's one thing to say. The other thing to say is they want Starmer because they see him as being more capable of carrying out the kind of repression they need against the working class in particular than the Tories are. The Tories, if they try and carry out the kind of attacks on the working class that are needed, are more likely to generate a response that can't be controlled. If Starmer does it, they can dress it up in certain ways and they can engage the trade union leaders, who, of course, as you may know, are directly linked to the Labour Party. The trade union bureaucracy was one of the creators of the Labour Party. The trade union bureaucracy here are very much incorporated into the state structure, often via their relationship with the Labour Party, but also via the relationship they've had with the British state for really at least since the World War II period, arguably a little bit before. So what they hope here is to turn to Labour to carry through a lot of these repressions and attacks on the working class that will be required to revive, they hope, British capitalism. So the British ruling class still has an option. They have the Labour Party in reserve. That's why they're very keen for Labour to win the next election. The idea is you have then Labour for 5 years. That's why they want them to have a big majority so they can be as immune to public pressure as possible. And they need them to have that massive majority in order that they can carry through very unpopular things. They need that party to be stuffed full of like the worst type of like so-called progressives who are actually just as reactionary as anybody in the Tory party. They'll just do it with a rainbow flag and a Ukraine flag in their Twitter handle. So they are turning to Starmer in the hope that he can deliver what the Tories cannot. And if he can't do it properly after 5 years, they'll have had time to reconfigure the Conservative Party into something which is even more ferociously reactionary, and they'll try them again. Now, my point here is that Starmer for them will be able to do more than Sunak can in terms of his assaults on the working class, or at least that's what the ruling class are thinking. In Germany and France and in other places, it's broadly the same to a certain degree. I mean, Macron was a sort of new roll of the dice for the French ruling class. Macron and his new party, which sort of spun out of the various different existing parties, their job essentially is to try and deliver the assaults on the French working class that the previous governments weren't capable of carrying through all the way. And so far, nothing Macron has done has really worked. He's been subject to humiliating defeats in Central and West Africa, which he blames the Russians for, even though, as Putin pointed out in the recent interview he gave to Dmitry Kiselev, it's not something that the Russians actually had anything to do with. What happened is that this was probably triggered by the fact that the people like Chiani in Niger saw that the French were on the losing side in Ukraine and looked weak, and so it probably influenced them to go for it. But the contradictions that generated the rise of these nationalist juntas in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, those conditions all grew up organically inside those countries, and of course they responded to the exploitative role of French neocolonialism there. So the point is that the French ruling class took a bet on Macron, and it's not really worked out. So they will probably move in the direction of a more stronger fascist alternative or near-fascist alternative in the form of Marine Le Pen and the Rassemblement National. I think or was it National Renewal or something? The sort of the rebranded Old Front National that she led as a sort of breakaway from her old man's party. And the move to employ the services of Le Pen, I think, will come in France. It won't come without difficulties, but Macron has failed unless they can find another another leader from the bourgeois parties who carries any degree of credibility with him. Then they'll probably will turn to Le Pen. And I would say it's possible that in Germany, though this seems unlikely at the moment, that ultimately a deal between certain elements of the AFD will be done, perhaps. Now, bear in mind that there are certain elements in the AFD who are very much have more in common with someone like Meloni than they do with the sort of the scary nationalist image that the AFD has. So what you may end up with in Germany is the Christian Democrats, I would guess, might try and bring in elements from the AFD to serve in a coalition. I know they're demonizing the AFD and talking about banning it at the moment, but what that is, that's, I would say, guess, is a disciplinary mechanism. There will be many in the AFD who would happily make a deal with the Christian Democrats in Germany in return for certain restrictions on immigration, certain cultural policies that they would favor. And I think some in the Christian Democrats would happily give that to them if it bought them a stable government, which it may well do. So what we're seeing is a move towards a crisis. Certainly it's a move toward in a more Bonapartist direction, but that move's been going on consistently in Britain for 30 years. The assault on the working class goes back a long way. The assault on basic bourgeois democratic rights goes back at least to the late 90s in Britain, with the passing of the first anti-terror legislation post the Good Friday Agreement in Ireland, and pre-2001, so pre-9/11, we got a Terrorism Act put in place in 1999, which cited as the justification for it animal rights extremists. So you can guess how much bullshit that's in that. But the point is that there's been a gathering storm of an increasing reactionary move from the bourgeois in Britain for decades now. And it's only gathered pace as time has gone on. So the move to outright fascism might not be necessary in certain respects because they don't need at this stage to fundamentally reassemble the state. What they already have all the laws that they need. Any move to fascism, I think, would only come after a twin crisis for the bourgeois. One would be another further and much deeper economic crisis, a renewal of the crisis of 2008. The other would be intensified working class resistance, which they are going to get, both in France and in Britain, and of course the rest of Europe as well. That is going to happen. It's been pretty intense class struggle in France already over the last 5 years. So I think you will probably get more. And of course, the more desperate the bourgeois get to restore profitability, the more brutal their attacks are going to be on the working class, and the more the authority of the existing state and the existing governmental setup will drain away. And if it gets to the point where the ruling class are faced with a revolutionary challenge, it's at that point that the fascist option becomes available to them. Because again, let's just talk about what fascism gives the ruling class. It's not just a case of bringing in a military dictatorship, though of course it has certain similarities to that. Fascism, in its classical forms, has always come accompanied by a fake revolution. And the fake revolution is crucial to understanding fascism. The fake revolution led by Mussolini, of course, was very much about aesthetics and promises of a unified national economy and society, though in actual fact most of what he did involved crushing the working class and restoring profitability to capital. Yes, he annoyed the Italian ruling class a little bit by trying to force them into these national syndicates where capital and labour would be unified, but of course it was never about empowering labour, always about empowering capital. So the fake revolution there is clear. It was informed by Mussolini's rhetoric from when he was a syndicalist. The cynical fake revolution of the Nazis in Germany was much more informed by Hitlerian reactionary interpretations of like community cohesion and a unified society. That's why they adopted the term socialist, National Socialist German Workers' Party, because they realized that working class organization in Germany was very, very strong. And they, as was support for socialism in 1918 to 1920 when the party was being formed, and therefore they couldn't be seen to be openly against that. They just wanted to say, oh no, we're just for a specifically German version. The fake revolution was there for the petty bourgeoisie. So all the talk of all the public face of the Nazis, their commitment to like mass gatherings, they're stealing from the communists and the old social democrats the idea of mass outdoor sporting events, that kind of thing. The idea of the whole redesign of the German economy was dressed up in this idea of again the unification of labor and capital. That's what how they justified the creation of the German Labor Front. The revolution that was promised to the likes of Ernst Röhm and what was referred to as the left Nazis, that of course never materialized, and Röhm himself was killed. But because they were promising in vague terms via the rhetoric of the Strasser brothers that there was going to be some sort of petty bourgeois German socialism was going to occur. They had no intention of doing that. That's why Röhm was killed. But they promised the petty bourgeois a revolution of sorts, and so that's why you get the petty bourgeois militants of the Nazi Party continually mobilized against the Jews. The campaign against the Jews was the fake revolution of Nazism. So the point here is that the fake revolution performed is vital to fascism, because what you have to do is you have to bring back into supporting the state the disillusioned and ruined petty bourgeois. And you do that by mobilizing them with the promise of this fake revolution. Sometimes, and the way the fascists always speak is always elusive. Sometimes they'll say, we're against, Mussolini always used to call it plutocracy. Or Hitler used to say that they were against elements amongst, it was always, for him, it was always the Jewish bankers. Or the Jews who were ultimately behind the unpatriotic bourgeois and also behind the communists, all to disguise what was really going on, all to bamboozle people and lead them away from the proper conclusions, and to sort of carry through this fake sense of a revolution. Whereas in actual fact, what you're doing is you're dramatically reinforcing the status quo by giving the ruined petty bourgeois this fake sense that they are standing against something. And when we start to see movements like that, then it will all make more sense in terms of the way in which the fascist parties are restructuring and restructuring themselves. So the whole question of when we get to fascism, I think, will be able to be observed by an extended period of class struggle in which the bourgeoisie are fearing that they are actually going to lose control. And ultimately, for fascism to triumph, what will need to happen is that there is a fake revolution, in which the fascists try to carry through a vast act of repression against the working class, dressed up in sort of revolutionary rhetoric, and that's the point where you will see the fascists actually rise to power. It will take a failure on account of the organized working class, because remember, there were many opportunities that the German working class had where power could have been conceivably have been taken, but there wasn't sufficient organization, there wasn't sufficient leadership. The working class was still too split between the Social Democrats and the Communist Party for this to be carried through. So how does this relate to our current situation in Europe? Well, we're close to descending into outright Bonapartism. were close to descending into ever greater attacks on basic democratic rights. That much has been made very, very clear by the bourgeoisie. But as to going into open fascism, as yet, it's still not quite there, because the reason is, conversely enough, that the challenge from the working class isn't coherent or strong enough, and the bourgeoisie still feels they've got options under the current system. Now, that might not last too long. We might be at a point where things start to actually fall apart on this, but that's where things stand at the moment. So the Macron meltdown is a product of a ruling class that has got itself stuck, that has got itself involved in a war that it thought was going to be easy, and now it turns out to be anything but. But do the people, the serious people in the French ruling class, actually believe that they're going to have some kind of like Russian reconstituted Soviet Union led by Commissar Putin rolling over Europe all the way to Paris? They don't believe that. They don't believe that in a million years, because they will have been told over and over again, and you can see clearly the internal discussions in the Russian government and their external statements. They clearly don't believe that. The Russians aren't going to do it. They all know the Russians aren't going to do it. This is all just bullshitting and waffling. And it's designed principally to try and encourage their internal political opponents to let them do what they want in terms of sending military equipment to Ukraine without any questions. Again, the aim of the Ukraine war is to have an outsourced war, to have a war that can be fought without any political or cost to themselves. That's what they want. They don't want a war that will come home and bite them on the arse. And here's something that where we draw on what the great Chairman Mao said in his famous phrase when he started talking about the fact that imperialism is a paper tiger. What Mao realized and what Mao stated there was very true, which is it's that the reason why it's a paper tiger is that its connection with the masses is very weak. And the connection with the masses that the bourgeois had post World War II was far stronger than what they have now. And they know that. They know the reason why there's not been any call up here thus far, the reason why they didn't even increase defense spending in the last British budget is because they know perfectly well that they can't. They know perfectly well that if they tried to do a call up right now, that they would get nowhere near the level of enthusiasm, shall we say, that they would need. They would actually, in actual fact, get the opposite, which was a crisis of legitimacy for the system, and a crisis in terms of the potential revolt of the population if they started issuing call-up papers for people. The connection with the masses is too weak. And so what you have is a Europe that is stuck between one thing and another. It can't go forward. Their gamble on defeating Russia via an outsourced war has not worked. And they know that the US will not commit itself to a war against the Russians, because the people who are running the United States might be cruel and sadistic, but they're not completely insane. They wanted an outsourced war as well, for all the same reasons. So this is a European bourgeoisie which is absolutely stuck. Can't go forward, can't go backward. All they're going to try and do is to keep this war spinning and spinning and spinning until they hope that they can exhaust the Russians, even though they will not. And then that will lead them to some sort of victory, or at least a defeat that nobody will notice. But the truth is that this is already over for them. If they actually wanted to commit themselves to the full-throated defense of Ukraine, they could have done it in 2021. But they thought that the Russian state and Russian military and Russian economy were far weaker than they actually were. They have taken these gambles and they have lost quite spectacularly. So we now have 126 watching and 64 likes. Be sure to like and share this stream if you haven't done so already. Now, a couple of things coming up. I will be doing on Saturday of this week a stream on the outcomes of the National People's Congress. So we're going to be having that on Saturday of this week. So be sure to tune in for that. Tomorrow we'll also have the second part of the Q&A for Patreon. And so that'll be up on Patreon in video and audio form tomorrow. And the next film review, which will be next weekend, will be the review of RoboCop, the 1987 classic. So look forward to that one. Now, I have to get going because I've got an early start in the morning. But thank you for joining me through this walk through the madness of Emmanuel Macron. I'll be back with you again tomorrow at it's around about the same time. So thanks to everyone who's joined the stream, and I'll be back with you again in 24 hours.
Tanto vivono le mode